What's going on? Gaston with FK Irons, and today we're going to be talking about motors. I know that a lot of you guys have a lot of questions regarding how long does a motor last, how can I prolong the life of the motor, and in this video we're going to be talking exactly about that. So as you can see, I have Spectra Scion, Spectra Halo, Spectra Direct 2, and also I have a Spectra XJ. So the main feature about all of our machines is that you can remove the motor. Now you can remove the motor for several reasons. Reason number one, our system is one of the first systems where you can remove the motor and change the cam. And the other advantage is that you can have different cams in different motors, and you can connect the different motors with a specific cam at any given moment. So those are the main features why you may want to remove a motor. But also there's another one, which is the worst case scenario. You can remove a motor if a motor have gone bad, right? And these motors do go bad. Now, how often, how soon? Well, that depends between artist and artist. You know, the more you use your machine, the more you're gonna put your parts subject to wear. And now remember, I just said subject to wear. Motors are not just a shaft to spin. Motors have bearings, motors have brushes, commutator, housing, shaft, and a bunch of parts. So there are many reasons why you may need to replace a motor. So I wanna try to explain how a motor works. So every time the motor spins, makes contact with the brushes on the commutator. And the commutator is basically what causes the motor to spin. That commutator and the brushes are consistently under friction. So the brushes are actually, they're spring loaded, so there's pressure against the commutator. So brushes are always gonna start wearing out. From day one, the brush is gonna wear off. Part of the failures of the motor is brushes, but there is another variable, especially in high precision motors like this one. These motors have bearings, and why they have bearings? Well, they have bearings because that's the best way to keep the shaft completely balanced and level and steady. So bearings are also subject to wear, and we would have to explain to you guys how bearings work, but most of you guys know how a bearing works, right? It's a little cage with a bunch of little balls at a glance. The other reason why a motor can fail is because one of the bearings have failed, or perhaps in this motor that have two bearings have failed. And the bearing has a tiny cage that retains the balls, and sometimes that tiny cage can actually break after so many hours of use, and there goes the motor. So the most vulnerable parts in the motor are the brushes, the commutator, and the bearing. So these are the main reasons why motors fail. And this is the reason why use is gonna have a direct effect with the life of the motor. So the more you use your machine, the longer you use your machine, the harder you push your machine, the more you're gonna put those parts subject to wear. Now, most manufacturers provide you a 1-year warranty, meaning that they warrant the motor for 1 year, and they know that that's about the life of a regular motor with regular use. This doesn't mean that your motor is gonna die right after 12 months, but it means that they're estimating that parts are gonna be good for about a year. What happens if your motor fails before a year? It's very, very simple. If your motor fails before a year, we simply replace the motor. If the motor fails after a year, well, think about your car, think about tires, think about brake pads. You know, tires and brake pads are exactly the same thing. You know, those are parts that are subject to wear. You may replace your tires before a year, you may replace your tire in 3 years. So the same concept of a brake pad and a disc applies for the brush and the commutator. The brush applies pressure against the commutator, and the motor is spinning, causing the friction to wear off the brush. So if you decide to go for a rotary machine, for a fact, at some point you are gonna have to replace a motor. It's not a matter if, it's a matter when you're gonna have to replace that motor. All motors, after a certain amount of time, they're gonna need to be replaced because either the brushes are gonna be wear off, the bearings are gonna be wear off, or it happens, you know, we drop machines. We also can damage the motor by cracking the magnet or actually displacing the magnet from its place. There is a very tight tolerance between the rotator, the winding, and the magnet, and it's about 0.25 millimeters in this machine, for example, and I believe on this one it's about 0.5 millimeter. So how to prevent being caught off guard? It's very simple. You can always have a spare motor, just like you have a spare tire in your car, and if anything happened, or at least if you're waiting for us to evaluate that motor to know if there is a problem, then you can actually pop a motor and, you know, and you're up and running really, really quick. There may be other reasons why your motor may stop working, and one of the reasons could be something happened to the RCA. I know that not all RCA cables are exactly the same, and sometimes the defective RCA cable can actually damage the connector and therefore you can damage the connection from the RCA female to the motor. How to avoid problems? Well, simply take good care of your machine. Don't run the machine excessively high if you don't have to. You can achieve most work from 5 volts to 10 volts, 10.5 volts. I mean, there's no need to run your machine at 11 or 12 volts. So I'm gonna give you a couple of tips, very simple, how to extend the life of your motor. Number 1, store your machine safely. A lot of the times, you may not be the one dropping the machine, it may be a coworker, and then they just pick it up and put it on the table, nothing happened, but put your machine away. There's no reason why you should have your machines on the table. So if you're finished tattooing, put your machine away. Number 2, there are different reasons why I wouldn't recommend you run a machine, let's say at 12 volts. In the case of a SpectraSign or one of this machine, you can achieve most of the work running the machine between 5 volts and 10 volts, 10.5 volts. I don't think there is a reason to run a machine at 12, but again, some people like to push the machine that fast. If you're one of those artists that like to push the machine that fast, remember, the faster you run the motor, the faster the friction is going to occur, the faster the wear off is going to occur. Is that a problem? Well, I mean, it's not a problem if you're really willing to replace a motor probably sooner than later. And this is the reason why some motors may last 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year, depending how hard you use the motor, how much you use the motor, how often you use the motor, and also the system. The system of the Scion has the motor oriented in this position, concentrically to the housing, where in this machine, the motor is actually at a 90 degrees in retrospect with the vise and the grip. Keep in mind, there are 2 different mechanisms. This mechanism is actually prone to work the motor a little bit harder, by default than this system. And this happens with most machines where you have a system propelled like the SpectraSign, a Swatch system, a direct drive system. Every mechanism, every system is going to have its own variables of wear off. So I hope you had enjoyed this video. Should you have any questions, feel free to drop your comments down below. I'll see you again in another episode.